100 years ago was the beginning of the First World War. And the ending of the First World War on November 11th is a day that we're honoring this Sunday. It began in a very different time from now. It began in a time when soldiers could say without any irony or any trace of cynicism that they fought for honor. They fought for their country. They fought for the empire. And the empire was a great thing. People in that time believed that they were quickly heading towards a utopia. And the technological and societal advances that had happened in the previous century were so astounding that it certainly makes sense that they would have thought that. From 1814 to 1914, we had the invention of industry itself. Things like coal power and flight, modern medicine. The last major global conflict, or at least a conflict on continental Europe that took up all of Europe, was Napoleon, which ended somewhere, I think, in 1815 was when the last battle was fought. So there was almost 100 years of relative peace. There were wars, but there was no reason to distrust the leaders of the nations. A lot of my history background was in music, as a music student. And one of the wonderful and amazing things about this time was artists and musicians were preoccupied with making music more and more beautiful. And they did it. The symphonies that were performed around the turn of the century were nothing short of astounding. If you take any music appreciation course, you'll always end, the last classes are with the turn of the century symphonies, composers like Gustav Mahler, who are still at the pinnacle of orchestral composition in a lot of ways. For the church in 1900, a lot of great Christian minds declared that the 20th century would be the Christian century. Still a very famous magazine called The Christian Century, which was founded early in the 20th century. Remember that the church in 1900 was largely a European church. That's pretty much where all the Christians were in Europe and North America. And there was a great belief that through all of these incredible trade routes that had been developed by the British Empire, among others, that there could be Christians in every part of the world. And if you looked at Europe and you saw the incredible peace and prosperity that had been happening for about 100 years, you thought, you know what? If we bring Jesus to every part of the world, we're going to bring peace to every part of the world, and prosperity and joy. It was an incredibly optimistic and exciting time. And so the church was thrilled. We had no reason to doubt our leaders, no reason to question the powers and principalities that were shepherding us into a wonderful new age. So imagine our devastation when England and France, Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, it was sort of almost a perfect storm of inept leadership. All the leaders failed us, and over the course of a summer, before anybody knew what was happening, the greatest armies that the world had ever seen went off to war with technology nobody understood. Nobody had encountered modern warfare. And so all of these incredible things that we had built, this amazing industry, was harnessed for war. And millions upon millions of artillery shells were dropped. Millions of guns. Tanks were invented. The great gift of flight was harnessed to drop bombs. The brilliant scientific minds, the great chemists, The great biologist that was propelling modern medicine into the future was now inventing things like mustard gas. Imagine being Canadian at that time. There were only 8 million of us in 1900, or at the outbreak of the war. But of the 8 million people in Canada, most of us living in very small rural communities, very, very tightly knit, 600,000 young men were sent over to fight. Every one of them was changed forever. We didn't really understand mental health, so if you came back unscathed, you were fine. 200,000 were wounded. 60,000 were killed. And when the war ended, we lived in a new world. The world that emerged following that war was a world where we stopped trusting those people in authority. Imagine the great British Empire harnessing people from every corner of the earth to go to France and Belgium to fight. And they arrive in all of their various dress and from speaking all kinds of different languages, and they're sent to fight in battles like the Battle of the Somme, where entire armies were essentially destroyed in a few days. And tragically, our church was so supportive of every decision that our politicians and our military made. We believed in the dream of the empire. Imagine being a priest in that time. And there were so many priests that did this, where they called up the young men in their churches and said, "We need you to go over and fight for us. The empire needs you, Canada needs you, your parish needs you to fight on the right side." Imagine the bishops, the responsibility that they would have felt following the war when they realized these young men coming back told them what had happened. You go to our cathedral downtown, you go to the cathedral in Montreal, I'm sure there's a lot of other cathedrals like this who, following the war, built a war chapel. And I've only really recently started to understand the very complex feelings of a chapel like that. Think about the responsibility that the church felt. We asked them to go over and fight. We, at the time, were the moral leader of this nation. Every politician, every philosopher, every citizen listened to the church. And we said, yes, this war is right. Think of the responsibility that we have. And so we have these chapels in Montreal. You can see there's the rood screen, and that part of the chapel is still there. And above it, there's a wooden statue of a nurse and a soldier. And there's now very old battle flags that are in there. And now we're living in a different world. The philosopher Slavoj Žižek said, he said, we all still believe in the big other. He said, there's not a lot of atheists in the world. He said, what we've lost in the 20th century is a belief in the little other. The politician, the judge, the teacher, the priest. We're living in a society following this war, and that war sent us on a trajectory that we are still on, where we're not sure we can trust our politicians to send our soldiers to war competently anymore. We're not sure that the priest can be trusted with our confession. We're not sure the police can be trusted to make our city safe. We're not sure our teachers can be trusted to tell the truth. We're living in a very different world now. 100 years ago, our nation was tightly woven together. And now we're living in a world where one of the chief causes of stress and anxiety is loneliness. It's a peaceful place, but many of us don't trust our neighbors anymore We don't trust our leaders. Many of us don't even know our neighbors. We're not excited to take part in elections still. And we don't tend to trust the politicians that we vote for, let alone the ones that are actually in power. The police make us a little nervous. For most Canadians, organized religion makes us a little nervous. I heard a great line yesterday, well, you should come to our church because we're not organized at all. And higher education, we send our young people to universities, but we often say things like, you need to go to university if you want to get a good job. 100 years ago, we might have said, you need to go to university because we can trust that those professors will improve your character, your moral stature, help you become a wiser person, a better person. We've lost faith in the little other. So I'm here on thinking of Remembrance Day, and I'm not exactly sure what we're supposed to do when we think about modern warfare today. I have a lot of questions about what we're doing. We were at war for 13 years. That's the longest war Canada's ever been in our entire history. But we were encouraged from the outset. I remember following September 11th, people were saying, well, you got to keep buying stuff because we can't let our economy falter. So don't change anything that you're doing in your life. Keep buying things. Okay, so we did. But our lifestyles never changed. And now we started another war against a group of people that, according to our leaders, sound very scary. According to the media, sounds very scary. Of course, we're living in a world where we don't really trust the media very much, or our leaders very much. I don't know what's going on over there. We dropped a bunch of bombs. I have a lot of questions. There's a lot of places that we can go. But I want to leave you with this, because I think one of the biggest crises that I have is we're living in a world where the church is still in a place of deep humility. The church's history works in centuries. We think as a church in centuries. And I think it's going to take a long time for us to recover from some of the things that happened in the 20th century as a church. Somebody said recently, a priest in this diocese, Carolyn Seabrook, she said to me, the currency of churches is relationships, or are relationships. And relationships move at the speed of trust. The currency of the church is relationship, and relationships move at the speed of trust. And I feel like that's the kind of pace we're looking at as a church. If we want to say something profound about war, about violence and peace, we have to earn the trust again. And I feel like we're still earning it back from our communities, from the people around us, from the many, many Anglicans that are not going to church. If we want to gain any kind of currency, we need to build our relationships. And that building process moves at the speed of trust, which is to say, slow. It took a very, very long time for the church to become as powerful as it was 100 years ago. It took a long time. Think about all those wars that were happening in Europe for hundreds of years. It took a long time. And it's going to take us a long time too. But the church thinks in centuries, in relationships, in trust. That's the speed that we move as a church. So I don't know, I'm going to leave you with that.